Okay, so in the last class, the last thing we covered was the Stamp Act, okay? And what the British Parliament were basically doing was bringing in this heavy tax, okay, uh, onto the Americans, which the Americans saw as unfair because all the British were trying to do was to um, to gain back some of the money they lost whilst conquering Canada. Okay, pretty much that was the rationale behind it. Okay, we remember that little phrase that we saw from this video here: no taxation without representation. Okay, so when you watch this video, we only watched about 3 or 4 minutes of it in class, but this video is actually 12 minutes long. Okay, so it gives you a prelude, okay, to the Stamp Act and some other things that happened around that time. Okay, so the point is that there's a retaliation starting to grow from the Americans. Okay, if we look at this last point here about the resistance group on the Sons of Liberty, okay, so little groups were starting to form. Okay, we're going to discuss another group called the Minutemen in a few minutes, which again was another resistance group. Okay, and they had a massive role actually to play in the start of what was going to be the American Revolution. Okay. Um, okay, so let's move on. So the Boston Massacre. Okay. Um, this was seen as obviously the word massacre is a small bit of an exaggeration. If we look at the amount of people who actually died, it was only 5 people. Um, but at the same time, it was the ruthlessness and the cruelty, which is the word I've underlined here, which is something which is a key word that you should use when discussing the um, the Boston Massacre, because um, there was very little reason, as we can see here. British guards needlessly opened fire after a dispute. Okay, when a dispute broke out. So you can argue there that there was how do I say that they were abusing their power, the fact that they had weaponry, etc., on who were seemingly innocent civilians. Okay, um, this happened 5 years after the Stamp Act in 1770. Okay, important to note that date. Um, and as we can see here, most of the soldiers were acquitted in court later on. No surprise there, because obviously the courts were ran by the British Parliament, more so by a significant name, John Adams, okay, who we will see in a video later on as well, okay. He was a lawyer who basically was able to acquit these soldiers in court. There was a small bit of sympathy then from the British Parliament, who removed a number of taxes on imports, basically to lessen the chances of another revolt from the Americans in light of what had just happened. Okay, so the only export that was not or import, sorry, that was not taxed, or not where the tax was not removed, was tea. Okay, we'll see now in a minute how significant that would be. Okay, if we just take a quick look at this picture, it's a pretty famous picture of the soldiers opening fire. Okay, on a couple of innocent civilians there, and we can see that 7 people got injured as well. Okay, so realistically, they probably got shot and just survived. Okay. We can see this man in the background. It's almost like there was an order, okay, to open fire, and then these soldiers followed suit. Okay, so it just paints a picture of the ruthlessness and cruelty that occurred on this day. Okay, which is something that highlights again the abuse of power that the British were uh, exerting on their American counterparts. Okay, so a fierce rivalry beginning to start at this time. Okay, three years later, okay, again, between 1770 and 1773, that doesn't feel like a lot of, or sound like a lot of time in history, okay, but at this time, things moved quite quickly at the same time, okay. We're talking 5 years between the Stamp Act, 3 years between the Tea Party, and, it's very significant how quickly these things actually happened, okay. So the Tea Party in itself was originally just supposed to be a protest meeting, and on the 16th of December 1773, okay, it was to take place in Boston Central, in its town, okay. And what happened was, in the end, that they decided from this meeting that they would act, and basically go on board and dump these crates of tea from the 3 ships that had been landed in the harbour, and dump as many crates as possible into the sea. Okay, so this East India Company had recently had their taxes cut. Okay, in order so they could supply more, and give they at the time they were going to be run bankrupt, actually. So lessening these taxes meant they could continue to export to the US, and the US will continue paying money on this back to the Parliament. Okay, so the Parliament, all they were doing was moving their income around, but they were still receiving the same amount of money, essentially. Okay. Remember, tea being a very valuable thing to US citizens at this time. Okay, and that figure of 342, okay, pretty much all the crates that were on board, okay, were poured or were spilt into the sea. Okay, funnily enough, in the months to follow, locals who were eating fish that were brought in from the sea said that it tasted like tea, in fact, and that in the surrounding waters around the ships, that so much crates had been thrown overboard, that the how do I say, the water level, okay, had risen to almost the level of the ship. Okay, and obviously the color of the sea had turned brown, etc. So 342 crates was massive. Okay, and what it was it had very little to do with the tea, but more so because obviously they were shooting themselves in the foot with this tea, so, as it was a popular drink at the time. But it was a statement that we were not going to accept the taxes on teas at the time from the Americans. Okay, obviously, it goes without saying, just pause this at any time that you need to start taking notes. What I would say is try to listen to the video and then pause it at the end of when I'm speaking at each slide, to give yourself the time to take down the notes properly. Okay, it'll be better for you in order to retain the information afterwards. Okay. So the intolerable acts, again, what we've been looking at here over the last couple of slides is just an action and reaction. Okay, so the Americans are reacting to attacks or a rule that the British bring in, and then the British fight back with another rule, and the Americans revolt, and it's like a game of tennis, pretty much. Okay, so one side is not how do I say, relinquishing in order to get the upper hand. Okay, so King George's reaction to the Boston Tea Party was that he pretty much abolished the power of the Massachusetts Assembly. Okay, when I say abolished, it still existed, but all their power was gone. Okay, so Massachusetts was now being completely run by the British Parliament. Okay, going from the citizens up. Okay, so as we talked about in the, if we just go back here a few slides, the system of government that the Parliament imposed on the colonies, where you had a governor of each colony, followed by an assembly, and followed by citizens and slaves. Okay, so this so let me just go back. So this assembly was pretty much finished. Okay. On top of that, he closed the Boston Harbor. Okay. So the people of Boston were really, were really infuriated by how they'd been treated over the last couple of years now. Okay. If we look at how that affected their imports coming in, okay, slow, problematic, okay, having to try to get their imports from other harbors to travel to get them. You're talking about trying to put food in people's mouths here at the time. So closing down that harbor was a massive setback, okay, for that colony. This other act that he brought in was, we'll see a couple of other acts actually that he brought in the video at the end. But this one, I think it was called the Quartering Act, I'm not quite sure, where he forced Americans to house British soldiers without a negotiation at any moment. Okay, now this was highly advantageous for King George, okay, because he could now spread his army out throughout the country. Okay, so they wouldn't have to necessarily live in their own houses. Okay, so all these little all these little groups, resistance groups, okay, that were being set up, now had to counteract with the fact that a British soldier could easily come and live in their area or in their house whenever they wanted. Okay, obviously then they could stay for as long as they wanted as well. Okay, and overall, just even their presence in the house, okay, like the country, the two lands are almost at war here, and it's actually somewhat similar if you think about it to it. Just to make a quick comparison, when the German soldiers were living in French houses during Vichy France in the Second World War, okay, that the British soldiers were just living in American houses as they pleased, okay, and just the mobilization of the British army then around America was so much easier for King George. Okay, now again, what could the 13 colonies do about it? Nothing, in terms of as they had no power. Okay, but again, we will probably see some sort of a reaction, okay, from maybe these resistance groups or something, okay, because of these intolerable acts. Okay, so just as I said at the start of the slide, that it's almost like a game of tennis. Okay, it's just back and forth between the two on action and reaction. Okay. Okay, so the Continental Congress happened in 1774, so just 1 year after the Tea Party. Okay, each colony sent at least one representative to meet in Philadelphia. Okay, with the objective of retaliating to the intolerable acts of the United Front. Okay, so that was key to the start of the American Revolution, that the colonies were now beginning to work together. Okay, that they understood that with a united front, there was a chance that they could take on this British army. Okay, and that, okay, well, these little resistance groups, while they were important, at the same time having a united front, okay, with 13 colonies all together fighting against the Brits was evidently a lot stronger. Okay. So what they did was, the first step they took was that they decided to boycott British goods. Okay, By British, I mean any goods that came from the Commonwealth. Okay, so that included tea coming from India as well. Okay, silk coming from India. So all these products, okay, were were boycotted, and they basically held an ultimatum. Okay, sorry, and their condition was that either the intolerable acts were removed, okay, or else they would boycott these British goods. Okay, and if these intolerable acts were removed, this would hopefully give them a chance to be able to regulate their own taxes. Okay, so it's important to note that while they wanted to regulate their own taxes, and that was the objective, that they still didn't actually mind being under British rule. Okay, the 13 colonies who had a governor, except Massachusetts, who answered directly to King George. Okay, they didn't mind keeping that, but they wanted to regulate their own taxes. Okay, again, going back to that statement that we heard just before the Stamp Act, no taxation without representation. Okay, so if we just quickly go back actually to the question, what kind of effect do you think this had on Americans? Taking ruling from a parliament on foreign soil, uh, taxes shouldn't be imposed by their individual assemblies and not by the British. The parliament was not elected by them but by the British population. Okay, so they weren't the ones making the decisions. Again, the British were. Okay, so this obviously gave cause to their retaliation in this sense. Okay, some could argue that this was perhaps just a stepping stone. Okay, that by getting the right to regulate their own taxes, that this would maybe allow then a foundation for them to build and then to move on to the next step, okay, which would be maybe gaining independence and so on, okay. Okay, so I mentioned the Minutemen at the start of this video, okay. They were set up to, sorry, I can't see that word, 2 seconds. Set up to fight, sorry, against the British. Okay, Lord Gage, if you can remember that name, I should have underlined it actually. He was basically placed in charge, okay, from King George. Now, he was supposed to be some sort of like peacemaker, okay, in all this, and to keep tensions down. But in actual fact, he had the he took the initiative of deciding to try to steal the arms that the Minutemen possessed, basically. Okay, so by taking these actions, he wasn't necessarily, keeping peace between the two sides, but more so just trying to gain an advantage. Okay, essentially trying to win. Okay, what was turning out to be a small bit of a bit of a war here. Okay, we could, when we say first shots fired, um, it's often argued that these shots that I'm going to talk about in a minute were the opening shots of the American War of Independence. Okay, um, so again, there's no definitive, like we talked about the Enlightenment. When does it start? When does it finish? There's no definitive date to say this was the official start of the American War of Independence. Okay, but when we talk about everything that's happened leading up to this point, okay, excluding the Boston Massacre, that these shots fired between the Americans and British at each other, let's say, um, at each other was the start of an all-out war, because two sides were fighting against each other now, okay, with weaponry. Okay, so going back just quickly before the shots were fired, why did this happen? Lord Gage decided to try steal the arms of the Minutemen in a place near Concord. Okay, now um, their message was basically intercepted by people in the countryside, um, and sorry, basically just before they left, Americans started to spread the word quickly that this was going to happen tonight. Okay, on the night of the 18th of April, 1775. Okay, now this message was spread around pretty quickly. Okay, if you remember this particular man, Paul Revere. Okay, we see a picture of him here going around in a horse, telling people or warning them about the Americans' quest to Concord. Okay, this turned out, so yeah, if you want to give an example one of those messengers there, that Paul Revere, okay, would be a perfect example. Okay, they were intercepted at a place called Lexington. Okay, I should have underlined that one as well, because that's very important place in terms of where this all started, obviously. Um, so they opened fire on their counterparts at Lexington. Okay, and the battle went on to the next day, where the Americans were able to fire back. Okay, I think 8 Americans were killed in total. Okay, some British were also killed as well. And basically, again, going back to the whole action and reaction thing, when the Americans got a foothold, okay, at Lexington, they were able to force the British to retreat back to Boston. Okay, and in retaliation, King George placed the city under siege. Okay, which is sort of like a kind of confinement. Okay, where they control everything that came in and out of Boston. Okay, and a pretty kind of strict ruling of the city. Okay, um, but if we just take this snippet of information here, that the Americans forced the British to retreat to Boston. Okay, so this was seen as a little bit of a mini victory for the Americans, who were after gaining territory and a small win over the Americans. Okay, by pushing them back with their own soldiers. Okay, if we go back to the importance of these small groups. Okay, the Minutemen definitely played their role in this action. Okay, what I need you to do now. Okay, this is the link. Okay, or you can just type this in. We're going back to Crash Course. Okay, the videos we've been watching all along: Taxes and Smuggling, Prelude to the Revolution. Okay, I want you to watch between 2 and 10 minutes. Okay, you can watch before and after if you want, but the key moments are between 2 and 10 minutes. Okay, I'll give you a small bit more of an insight, okay, into each of the slides that we just spoke about there, basically. Okay, in terms of homework, what I will do is attach a question. Okay, what I need you to do, yeah, there will be a question attached to this email, actually. So I need you then to send on that work to me. Okay, even if it's just a screenshot, just send it back to the email. Okay, I'm obviously using your student emails to send this video. Okay, so all you need to do is, when you complete your notes and the question, just take a quick picture of it and then send it back in an email. Okay, that is going to be obligatory for all the classes that we do online from now on. Okay, I'm going to try to keep this video tutorial sequence. Okay, if it changes, I will notify you either by email, but probably by a call direct. Okay, and again, it's obviously necessary and mandatory that you complete this question and send it back to me. Otherwise, I will see that as homework not being done. Okay, again, given the circumstances, it's very important that we try to continue what we're doing in the best possible way. Okay, I can't I can't continue to work if you're not keeping up with me. Okay, so you need to follow all these videos, watch them, and obviously complete the work after, just as if we were in class. Okay, I don't want to be dealing with issues now, okay, of people not sending work back to me after their class is finished. Okay, I'm not accepting excuses of, oh, I forgot, I didn't watch the video, etc. Okay, this is the exact same thing as not showing up to class. Okay, so it's very important, let me stress that you send in the work after every video. Okay. um okay, so yeah, if anything changes before Thursday, I will let you know, and if not, please send me the your homework as soon as possible after after you watch the video. You know, realistically, this should be done before Thursday's class. Okay. So I want this sent in Wednesday night at the very latest. Well, yeah, Wednesday night at the very latest. Okay. Thank you. Goodbye.